the meeting today. Okay. So here is the I here is the draft. Hang on. This tab is the correct tab for the draft meeting agenda. So we have the usual format, which we look at approving the meeting draft agenda and also the meeting minutes of the previous meeting. And then we'll have some updates, mainly from Brett, and then a few items to discuss. Uday will present the AUPSS project overview or introduction. We don't have Jim here, do we? No, we don't.
Not yet. I can message him and ask if he's coming. We did actually say it would be the next week. I don't know if he's actually on all the invites.
Right. Yeah, he might not see the change of time either. So thank you,
I,
Daniel.
yeah,
If
I
he,
I sent him a message yesterday, and he knows the time and everything. So
oh,
hopefully,
okay, right.
yeah, he confirmed.
All right. So if we don't have him here today, then we'll have to skip his update as well. But we do have Ruben here. He might be able to step in, but we'll wait and see. Then we have Brett to provide us more update about the ballot that is in train at the moment. And Angus, we don't have him here. And then finally, we will be sort of switch over to Danielle for her Jira ticket discussions. And unless we have any other business that we want to raise here, so this will be the draft agenda. Anyone has any requests to change the agenda order or delete items, add new items?
I mean, I would suggest that I think the inclusion for Angus isn't meant to actually be in this meeting. I think we've already gone through an introduction of that, and then we're going to be working through it in the connectathon at the breakout.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's anything. Yeah, I think that was just maybe a copy pasta or something.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think thank you, Danielle. We can make a note for this agenda that the issues are largely sort of discussed and have a good understanding, and we'll hold this over to the connectathon and breakout sessions for further discussions. So we can actually sort of strike out item number 6. All right, with that sort of in order, so consider that the meeting agenda is approved as is. So let's go to the meeting notes for the previous meeting, which was 2 weeks ago, and on sort of July the 29th. So hang on, I okay, so here it is. So the full set of meeting notes. Brett, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that I saw you send out an email and a notice of this meeting minutes ready for members review. Is that correct?
I am unsure if I did or I
Yeah,
didn't. I can't even confirm that. Not sure.
you're not sure. I thought that I did see an email come out. So are we happy to approve this meeting minutes, or do we want to hold it over to the next meeting? I don't mind one way or the other. Brett, your call.
Oh, let's defer.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. In that case, then let's defer
Okay.
it for the next meeting. So at the next meeting, hopefully, we will approve this one and the meeting notes for today. Okay, all right. So in that case, then let's switch back to the meeting agenda for today. So I will hold the item number one will hold over to the next meeting. And number two, we will have updates from Brett on the two items. One is the ballot opening and timing, and then the Connectathon open sign up.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, this will be pretty brief. The ballot is open and is running through till the 2nd of September. Yep, so it's time to do your reviews of AU Core and AU Base. That's about it. Some reminders will go out around that during the period, but that is all up and running. And the other thing is the Connectathon event. There's still sign-ups. I believe there's still tickets available. And we do have a list of breakouts there. Some of these we've talked about before. So there's an IG publisher breakout. So it's going to be a practical, hands-on kind of session with problem and troubleshooting kind of activities. We've got the pathology terminology and identifiers discussion that Angus was had.
Okay, so just back on the item of the ballot timing, the cutoff is 2nd of September. I assume is Australian standard time at 11:59 p.m. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got up till the 3rd. Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Can we just
All right.
also then cover numbers? We have 53 voters signed up for this AU Base ballot.
And yeah, so the same number will be for AU Core as well, right?
AU Class 57, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Yes, more popular.
Okay, we are more popular. Okay, interesting.
Mm.
Very good. All right. All right. So, any questions on the ballot and also the Connectathon updates? All right. Not hearing anything, then let's move.
Sorry, I've got a question on the ballot.
Sure.
An issue's come up in GitHub. Is there a mechanism for getting that issue into ballot, or it has its own process? Or I'm just wondering
Um,
if there's something to worry about there, or if I can just let somebody else worry about it.
well, it's
Like
not. Oh, you go, Brett.
I was just gonna say the like GitHub issues are really only for technical internal IG content. Cut and paste is good if you want to make a Jira ticket if it's actually a committee activity or a co-chairs activity. And that's the only way we would probably look at it as a ballot item is to put it into Jira.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Yeah.
So
I
if
mean,
you
we
do
still
that,
look at GitHub.
yeah, we don't have like a formal how do you move it process because we're too small.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
I
typically, if you've moved something into Jira in the past, what we've done is like closed a GitHub issue with the comment moved into Jira and then linked like the Jira number.
okay. Yep, yep. I think somebody else raised it. I think it needs dealing with, and so I'll make sure it gets done as.
Is
Yeah.
this Andy's GitHub?
No, this is
Ooh, okay.
this is RKABDWAL, whoever he is. It's a
Mm.
problem with the slicing in some of our observations.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, that would definitely go into Jira. Yeah, it should move across into Jira. I'm just
Okay.
looking at it now. I mean, obviously we can go through it at a certain point, but yeah, it's definitely the kind of thing that is either a change request or a technical correction. Uh,
And it's not, and depending, yeah, and what that depends upon what we decide to do about it. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, that's good. Any other questions?
No.
All right, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Brett and Daniel, for the response. Okay, we have a way forward with that issue that Richard has raised. All right, moving on to item number three, Uday. So you are here to provide us with an intro overview of the AUPSS FHIR project. So
Sure.
I will stop sharing. So I'll give you the floor.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Okay.
Not yet. Oh no, now, yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Daniel. We have approved AUPD PSS, which is about to kick off now. This is one of the FHIR working group update we want to start with, starting from today, and it will be in every work group we want to give an update of what's happening in the project, basically. Okay, I'll go to the next one. So as everybody knows, the background of the project is the current AUPD FHIR is based on AU Base profiles. And we want to align with those profiles with AU Core for better for national interoperability standards. Proposed project as per the PSS, AUPD FHIR to align with AU Core, and as usual, improving interoperability and implementation consistency across Australia. Summary statement of AUPD PSS. Again, sorry, maybe I'm repeating the same thing again. AU provider directory, align that with AU Core. Establish a consistent national provider directory foundation, which is lacking at the moment. We have like HCIPD, which we are coming up with, but we are deriving that from AU Core. We want to derive that from AUPD once that is balloted and things like that. As part of the project, we want to modernize all the AUPD profiles to derive from AU Core again, and which also supports future national and jurisdictional directories as well going forward. Objective and scope. The scope of the IG is the objective of the IG is basically AU PD FHIR implementation guide. Deliver that as per the new standards, which will look alike with this, which will fall in the same category as AU Base FHIR IG and AU Core FHIR IG, and and we are aiming to put that for technical testing in December Connectathon, and consecutively at the 2027 March HL7AU ballot. This AUPD FHIR IG will derive from AU Core profiles for consistency interoperability, and these are the list of profiles which we will derive from AU Core. Organizations, practitioners, the practitioner role, location, healthcare service, and endpoints. Okay, moving to the next one. The infrastructure we got for this project is we got a Confluence page, which is put up in Confluence as of now, and there's some more details we need to fill in there. So once it's there, anybody can give some feedback for that as well. The high-level project plan. We want to do the development iteratively until starting from now and until the end of 30th October, which will have which we are aiming to put up like create two profiles at a time. Like for the next meeting, which we have next week, we want to create a draft of practitioner and practitioner role profiles and get feedback and review from the project members and get and implement that feedback as well going forward. Once that feedback is received, we will act on that and present that profiles in the next meeting to get the confirmation of their feedback is addressed or not. And at the same time, we'll also work on the other 2 profiles and go forward. And we are aiming to get the final FHIR IG draft ready in November and address any other feedback, any final feedback which we receive via the project meetings. And we want to finalize the FHIR IG for HL7AU informative ballot as well on March 2027. We have a mailing list which we have created to sign up for the project meetings, and there will be a Zulip channel coming soon with the details of project kickoff as well.
So Uday, can you
Yep.
go back to that slide? So I just want to supplement by saying that between now and end of October, we have 7. We have the FHIR IG itself, all the contents which will be which will be putting together, and the 7 profiles will divide it into 3 chunks. So will be 2, 2, and 3. And we allow sort of 2 weeks of developments and also 2 conference call at the project meeting level to walk through the design with any interested participants who sign up for the mailing list to review during the walkthrough and also before the walkthrough, and raise any issues that we will address at the next sort of fortnightly conference call. So that's kind of the development plan, and then we'll have the final draft in sort of preparations within the month of November in preparations for the December Connectathon. And then leading from that will be the finalization of the FHIR IG package ready for AU informative ballot in March. So that's the plan at the moment. We'll have more detail sort of at the first. We'll have more details about this plan at the first project meeting that will happen next week. And the project conference page, we'll put content in there. And once we have the project conference page content ready, then we'll set up the Zoom channel with the links to the conference page, project conference page, and also the members, the mailing list members sign up as well. So therefore, people can read the information from the Zoom channel and then sort of take whatever action they desire in terms of the signing up.
Danielle, I have a question.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got some questions around. So this is a project being undertaken underneath the FHIR Work Group, and it seems there's already been an agreement, but we haven't talked about it at the FHIR Work Group yet to have a separate meeting schedule, so it won't come through the fortnightly work group like AU FHIR Work Group calls. It'll come through something else, but I haven't seen anything on Zulip or anything else that I can interact with either. So I think there's something that has to be done here.
I agree that something needs to be done, Danielle. We actually had a meeting with co-chairs yesterday, of which I and Brett attend. I will let Brett sort of because he has his hand up that I assume that he want to respond, and because I'm chairing, so I'll stop talking and let Brett do it.
Sure. I mean, we did have a meeting about it, but sure, I think we need to bring through the work group some of this discussion as well. The project itself, I think it is a fairly large piece of work, and I think so for the FHIR Work Group, I think it would take over a fair chunk of the agenda, which kind of blocks other things. So I think the proposal is that we turn this into a specific project meeting, and hopefully the engagement will include some of the people less regularly attending the FHIR Work Group itself, because I think there's some interest, Health Director and others that aren't regular attendees. But I think the idea was that we could have a separate project meeting. Work could be done there. That would be reported back regularly. So I think a regular slot in the FHIR Work Group to be able to do that, and then that way it's managed as essentially an externally running project. And there's a few other discussions around about co-chairing and stuff like that, which I think we have flagged that would actually go to want to get a confirmation from the TSC about that.
So Daniel, do you have further questions to raise
I mean,
regarding the
yes.
process?
So apparently there's some decision for a meeting next week, but like this is the first time we've heard about that at the FHIR Work Group, like how this would be run. And so I do think I don't actually have a problem with us having like an like a separate schedule or anything like that for this particular project, and the sign up and everything like that is good. I just think that there needs to be more involvement of the community in that decision and the voting, on like when are the meetings held and how does it work, and that being put forward as an option in this call so that the FHIR Work Group can confirm that that's what we're comfortable with because it's under the work group.
Understood.
I see other people have
Michael?
put their hand up, but yeah, that was my
Yeah.
thought.
Michael?
Yeah, I just think it's a very aggressive schedule, and to get enough community engagement and people potentially needing to turn up to a meeting next week. Yeah, it's just I think really tight timelines and just to get enough community engagement, to make sure that we've got the right people at those calls. I don't know if that's
Yeah, it is indeed. So the plan, Michael, is to at least have the draft agenda for the first meeting up, and then Brett will help distribute that through the mailing list. But unfortunately, through first the FHIR Work Group mailing list, and also the AU call, and also the e-requesting mailing list. So therefore, we have broad coverage at least for the first one. And then subsequent meetings, I believe that we will sort of send to the project mailing list and also the FHIR Work Group. We will consult with the other work group like AU Core and also e-requesting to see whether or not they want to receive fortnightly project meeting agenda notices as well. So we are working on that, and we acknowledge that this is very aggressive in terms of our timeline, and we need definitely, absolutely extensive community engagement. Any other questions, Michael?
No, that's good. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Ruben?
Yeah, look, just on the separate meeting thing, I hear where Danielle's coming from, and in a way, this is a really good problem to have because it means that we're maturing. I just wanted to add the way this is handled in HL7 international work groups is that the decision-making practices for the work group explicitly call out what constitutes a project level quorum for project level meetings, such that those groups can make decisions within the scope of their project. So I'm not sure if that's something we want to look at doing here, but that's one way to look at this. But having heard Michael's comment, just referring to things like enough participation, it would be really good to clarify what we think constitutes enough participation so that projects and work groups know how to plan things going forward. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I suppose in a comment on that, so I think the bit that I've been surprised by is we can take like a whole bunch of all the recent ones coming up where that where a work group owns multiple projects, that there have been discussions put to the work group in and of themselves of what would be the meeting schedule. Is it comfortable to have a separate one and then like picking the days? So that's gone through a work group process. And so it's a bit of a surprise to me that that's apparent, like that process isn't being supported for AUPD. Um, yeah. So I think I was just a bit shocked about that.
Okay, so I am chairing, so I will not respond to this yet. So Brett, would you like to respond to that?
I think that's a fair comment by Danielle. It's. I mean, I'm very happy to take this away and do some correspondence, and we can come back and discuss it. The meeting that was planned here for next week, I really saw that more as a kickoff meeting as well, and getting people on board with the project specifically. But the but I take that point. I think maybe we should do a bit more correspondence and the meeting that was planned next week. I think we should really be keeping it at a project discussion level and doing, trying to work out the scope and how that project would proceed as well. More just as a discussion and informational session as well. And then that would some of the things in play. We don't have another FHIR Work Group meeting for a while after this one, so we need to deal with that. And obviously the project wants to get started as well. The actual date and time chosen, the day of the week and time chosen were really to avoid other standards calls, and we're starting to run into that issue as well, where we don't have many slots available. So that would have to be addressed as part of the discussion as well.
Yeah, and so just before Michael goes ahead, I'm absolutely not objecting to having separate meetings or even having a meeting next week or any of those sorts of things. I am concerned about, I guess, the work group and having that like committee decision making kind of perspective. That's, I think, what I was raising.
Michael?
Yeah, I agree. And I think I liked Ruben's comment about the way International does it too, about having and a sort of understanding of what quorum is in the project meetings. And then we know whether we've got enough people and the right people there to go, yep, these meetings are good to make decisions, or whether they're run as information sessions and the meetings are made, the decisions are made in this meeting or the like. Just so we know where we're at with that and that we know what enough is, rather than kind of guessing after the fact.
Yeah, so on the international sort of practice, I have been with international standards projects for as early as 2010. And the decision process or requirement is that we always sort of set it at the chair plus three as the minimum. But we will always have the practice that if there are important decisions that needs to be voted on, we'll have more participations in terms of numbers, and also the spread of the representations from organizations and also individual backgrounds. So that's kind of the guideline that we have been following internationally. And I believe that that will be follow here as well. And there is a plan, Brett suggested that we'll take sort of the matter to the TSC this Thursday's meeting as well, and we'll discuss there as well, and we'll be looking to the TSC guidance during that meeting as well. Hopefully that address your question, Michael.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I kind of like I'm kind of proposing. I think next week we could hold that meeting, but I think it's more of a intro session and a informational session around the project. What's it going to be? Where's it going to go? TSC can definitely deal with. There were some questions about co-chairing of projects. For the core working group, actual co-chairs have chaired meetings, but there is some precedence at international that has not been something that has happened. It's possible to have a chair a project meeting. So we just want to sort of confirm the rules and make sure that's all squared away. And the other thing is, I guess, too, like we have to. I'm not sure how we're going to kick this off quickly with the FHIR Work Group meeting schedule at the moment. So I think we'll need to think about that in terms of, like, if there are agreements and timings to be set, we need to have that discussion in the FHIR Work Group. So it's more just missing meetings that sort of delays it at least a month if we don't do anything today.
Okay, any other questions?
I don't have one, but let me make one final comment. Let's just pop up the Zulip channel really quickly and then put out like this info, just going, hey, here's how you sign up and here's when the next meeting is, so that we also have that channel of communication.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right. We do need to pop up the Zulip channel, and we were waiting for the project conference page to set up, which we've seen that there is a link in there. And once we have populated the contents of the project conference page, then we will work towards setting up the Zulip channel. So therefore, the message is broadcast as broadly as possible. Thank you, Daniel, for that. Uday, next.
Yep, that's right. Okay. All right. So we will commence that development work, but obviously we need to put that first Zulip channel first, and then get the correspondence ready. And once we have everything, that's the next steps which we got. 18th August is the one which we have scheduled for the project meeting, and the work in progress will be presented in the IG group project calls for comments and feedback, and discuss any and address contributors' feedback and recommendations in the FHIR IG. And regular updates will be given in this meeting as well about how we are traveling, how we are progressing, and we are aiming to everything going fine. We are aiming to finish the development work of a draft FHIR IG by October 2026. That's about it. Any questions?
All right, Richard, you have your hand up, but I think Daniel has indicated that she has further questions. So Daniel, would you want to raise your question now, or you want to go
No,
after?
sorry, no, I didn't mean to. I might have accidentally pressed a button, but no, I'm good.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Richard, over to you.
I'm just looking at that first meeting on the next Tuesday, and the tone of this meeting, and wondering and the fact that it's a fortnightly cadence of project meetings. Right at the very start, there's a bit of work to make basic decisions, like, what is the IG going to look like? AU Core? Is it going to look like something different? Where's it going to reside? A few questions like that. Do you perhaps need next week's meeting and a meeting the week after, and then settle into fortnightly or something like that? I'm just thinking that maybe if you want to get it going quickly, you want weekly meetings for a little while before you settle into fortnightly. That was a thought.
Thank you, Richard. I think we did consider the frequency and also the days of the week to select. So first, my response to your question about the day of the week. So we actually look at the Thursday, Wednesday, and Thursday. They are pretty much chock-a-block full of HL7AU meetings, and we don't want to take more meetings to those 2 days. That leaves us Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. And I know that some folks work 4 days a week, so that practically kind of make Monday and Friday and sort of not attractive options. And that's why we landed on the Tuesday for the first meeting as that's the logical explanation as to why the first meeting landed on Tuesday. And we picked next Tuesday at the meeting yesterday because after next week there will be the FHIR Work Group meeting happens this week and then will happen every other 2 weeks. So we don't want to clash with the FHIR Work Group meeting, and hence sort of the kickstart will be next week. And we do acknowledge that given the tone of the conversation today, next week will not be a good timing in terms of sinking into too deep into the FHIR itself, but more of as Brett suggested, an overview and look at soliciting inputs from the process and also logistics of how to conduct sort of the project meetings and also the project the FHIR artifacts development. So I think that's something that we do have to kind of revisit the first project meeting draft agenda. As to whether or not we want to do it weekly at the beginning, it all depends on the bandwidth of the community. And bearing in mind that a lot of us have international meetings and also HL7AU meetings and work-related meetings. Any meeting more than frequent, more frequent than fortnightly, is that going to be a viable option? So that's the reason why we landed on the fortnightly meeting, alternating with the work group meeting, during which we'll give a 20 minutes update. So therefore, we get the best of the process. So that's the reason for that, Richard.
Yep. Look, I was primarily concerned about the frequency being perhaps a bit too low at the start, but I'd forgotten that in 2 weeks' time is the Connectathon. And so we don't really want to have a meeting, so that gets in the way of having one that week. So next week and then 2 weeks after that is as fast as these meetings can reasonably happen.
Look, we
I
can,
think my comment can be withdrawn on the basis that the Connectathon means that there's no point in having one the week after next because that's the Connectathon week. So I think my whole point is generated a lot of noise without any real value.
No. It's good to have those points raised, Richard. Don't get us wrong, or don't get me wrong as being defensive. I'm just trying to explain as to how those decisions were being made, and let's re-gauge sort of the next Tuesday's meeting as to whether or not we want to hold it more frequently, and the reason why I sort of hesitate about more frequently. There are reasons that I've explained, and the other one is about the progress work that the project team has to do. There's sufficient progress of the content for sort of weekly meeting. So those are the very legitimate reasons for consideration. And based on my international project experiences, usually a weekly project meeting might be too much given the amount of work that needs to be done. But we'll revisit it sort of these frequency questions during the first meeting next week. All right, any other questions? All right, if not, then let's settle the discussion as such, and we will bring the issue to the TSC discussions this Thursday as well, and then come back to report to this group at subsequent meetings. Thank you, Yulei.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll stop the sharing now.
All right. Okay, let me reshare. Okay, with that done, then the next item is over to Jim Steele for the terminology work group update. Jim, do you need a screen sharing?
Yeah, I think it might help. I'll just
Okay.
share the slides that I did at the last meeting, since this is really a continuation of the discussion we had at that meeting.
Okay, over to
that
you.
we sort of started there. Let me see if I can find my window. Last time I was here, a couple of weeks ago, we talked. I talked right at the end of the meeting about the terminology, HL7 Australia Terminology Implementation Guide. That is a project that's been approved, and we're just working now on sort of scoping out what it's going to look like. I think I went through what the proposal talked about. It's deliberately fairly non-specific, but it talks about publishing terminology artifacts for use by other implementation guides based on a collaborative model to assist other work groups achieve their terminology outcomes and in the context of their processes. So being able to track which resources come from which work groups and to be able to work with those work groups to manage those resources. And with the idea as well that the implementation guide would document maintenance processes for that content, and also process and governance guidance for terminology resources in general. We would look at having some profiles of terminology resources. We've had a bit of a scoping look at what sort of shape existing terminology resources in HL7 Australia implementation guides take, and there's pretty good uniformity already. There's a few things that we think we can do around the edges to continue to promote that uniformity. And then possibly also some guidance regarding the use of external terminology artifacts in the Australian context. What this isn't is trying to steal away artifacts that other work groups are already managing mostly well. This isn't no work group will be required to depend on this implementation guide or to contribute their content to it. And there's no decision already made about what goes in or how it's governed. So the reason we're here is we're trying to find out what the pain points are for managing terminology resources in other work groups, and what benefit we think we could get from this terminology implementation guide. So what sort of processes would work for transitioning content across to that implementation guide if work groups choose to do that, and then for ongoing maintenance of those. So coming back to the work group if that's what's desired to seek approval before changes are made, or having those changes requested through the work group and flowing into the terminology implementation guide, or whatever process works for the work group. We did see some small discrepancies in how value sets and code systems are authored across IGs, not big ones, mostly to do with the all codes value sets, the implicit all codes value sets. Other than that, there is pretty good uniformity across which elements are populated and how they're populated. But nonetheless, we would be looking to include some profiles to continue helping to maintain that uniformity and promote it. So the purpose really is to try and get some feedback as to what are the current pain points, and how would you envision a change process if content were moved across to the terminology implementation guide. From our point of view, we think we will need persistent records of which work groups own individual resources, and potentially more than that as well, as to which work groups have a stake in resources. so that if there are changes made, which other groups need to be informed or to have some oversight of those changes before they go through. But we really are open to what the process looks like for that. So I'd welcome input from other people here who've got experience with the challenges of maintaining terminology content and what you might look for from this project.
Okay, so are you inviting comments and questions, Jean?
Very much, yes.
All right.
How much time do we have to provide comment?
Well, we have lots of time today. If you're looking at today, Danielle.
Cool.
Yep. And in the broader scheme of time, we have plenty of time. I think we're on a clock from formation of the projects. It might be a couple of months ago now, but we've got many months before the project scope statement is expected by the TSC. We will move on some of this stuff, but none of it will be baked into stone until there's a scope statement, and obviously none of it will go to ballot that isn't in line with that scope statement when it happens. So, we will continue to seek input over coming weeks and probably the next couple of months.
Mm.
But yeah,
Okay, so I like the shape. So no one else has put their hand up yet. I would expect other people to eventually do so. But so I like the shape of what we've, I guess, bolded in the straw man around understanding who owns things, who approves things, who is consulted, who is informed. Obviously for some terminologies, sometimes there's some niche roles, but I think this is a good set. I think the majority of content we're currently using in FHIR specifications falls under a few different sort of aspects. And so, like, I've not come to any of the terminology meetings, so forgive me for not keeping up with what you guys have formalized yet. Obviously, we've got the stuff that the FHIR Work Group, which is really probably formally called the Patient Admin, the Australian Patient Admin Work Group, has brought through and defined, and it's in AU Base. And so within this model, could you tell me what you think would be a functional way of how, if we move maybe a code system under that terminology, how would we categorize who owns, approves it, and how do you think that might work?
Well, I think if we were moving something from AU Base, for example, then the owner is the FHIR Work Group, since they own that IG, and we would record that. I think the owner we would probably look to record on the resource with an extension. So THO use an owner extension already for all of their content. We'd probably look to use, if not there's some challenges currently about using the same extension, but if we don't use the same extension, we would use the same shape of extension for the owning work group so that we have a persistent record of that. I think we might need more because we've seen some instances where different groups, whether within HL7 Australia or outside, have a stake in changes to those resources and need to be at least consulted or at least informed about them. So I think we might need a slightly richer extension than what THO has used for ownership. Now, whether we put that in an extension or whether we have a separate registry of interests that are consulted every time that a change is made to one of those resources is an open question. I don't have a particular leaning in that. If anything, I probably lean towards keeping the owner in the resource and the stakeholders in a separate registry. Because it's not of as much interest to a user. I think the owner is of interest to a user of the resource because if they have a problem with it, they need to know who they can go to say, hey, I've got a problem with this resource. Whereas that's not true. They don't need to contact someone who just needs to be consulted about changes. So if there's a request for a change to one of those resources, then it would come to the terminology IG. The terminology IG would say, well, who's involved in this? We might shape out what that change looks like to make sure it obeys a profile and, obeys editorial rules, but then we have a list of which work group owns that thing, which work groups need to be consulted or informed, and we go back to those work groups to go through that process with them. So that's how I would imagine it would look. But that process needs to work with those work groups, and it might not be the same for all of those work groups either. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. It's deliberately vague because we're looking for input on how those processes might work.
Well, no, I mean, I think that was really quite helpful. I'm interested also to hear what Ruben and Brett says around this as well, because I think they both put their hand up probably because they want to add to my question. That's my thought.
Sure.
All right, let's move to, I assume that Ruben has his
That
hand
was-
up first, and then
It was
Brett.
Brett actually. It was first.
Oh, Brett first. Okay, then Brett, over to you.
Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, I think we need to work out how the FHIR work group's going to participate around this, especially with the ownership questions kind of a little bit different, I think, in the Australian context, because we do have an AU base. Like at international, the resources are divided up by work group, and they're essentially responsible for the resources and I guess terminology usage against those resources. So I think we'll have to. If we have a profile that uses a terminology, I think that would automatically put you in the interested party. So for the FHIR work group, that's quite a lot of different profiles that we have. Yeah, so I think that's just a thing to think about.
Yeah.
All right.
And that goes to sort of some of the process overhead too. Like if you don't want to have to vote on changes to these things, but you do need to be informed about them, then you may choose to just be recorded as an interested party rather than the owner. But that's entirely up to the
So just before we go then to Ruben, I'll comment there that we may, given the way that we're structuring things in Australia, which is to say that, for example, AU isn't defining its own terminology. And to that matter, actually, neither is patient summary. There are only some IGs that are doing that. The rest are inheriting and maybe strengthening through base. So there will be maybe decisions that are being made that we might go, well, this work group is the one that is owning and making the choices on it. But the normative impacts proliferate through quite a significant number of projects, which might be backwards incompatible. Maybe they're backwards compatible. And so it's almost like that old school kind of like software change request if we're going like whose products are actually normatively impacted by this. That is probably something we need to look into.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Brett, your hand is still up. Do you have follow-up questions? Oh, no. Okay, then let's move to Ruben.
I do.
Hang on. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm on a bit of a delay. So I think that kind of points at, I think that some of the more specific use cases, there'll be an interest and value set management probably attached to those specific use cases if they want to bring them through to the TWG. But from a domain sense, like I almost think the FHIR work group is interested in every usage. If you're planning to bind it to a FHIR resource, I think we automatically have some interest, even if we don't have profiles attached to it. But if we just leave it at profiles, that's probably a good start. If you have a profile and you're binding to something, you are interested by default.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, then if you have no further comment, Brett, let's move to the next one, Ruben.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, just a couple of quick points here. I'm not sure if everyone here was in the last meeting where Jim originally raised why we're doing this, but I just thought I'd just say something very brief about why we're going to what might seem like a lot of trouble here. The Terminology Work Group firmly believes that having a dedicated terminology IG and associated FHIR package is a net benefit to HL7 Australia work groups and the community of implementers, because it allows these terminology artifacts to independently mature and evolve when it doesn't make sense to do it within the IG itself, because there's not ballot cycles or a need to release a new version of the IG. That's one benefit. And the other one is for terminology servers like Onto Server, where if you had this in a package, it could be more easily provided and updated through syndication APIs and the like, to keep implemented terminology up to date without having to get packages for every IG out there. So that just wanted to touch on that firstly. To Jim's point, secondly, I think that whilst international does have an extension, and I've put a link to it in the chat, I'm not sure that's going to work particularly well for us, because that extension actually makes two assertions. It says that this one work group both owns and maintains the resource. I can imagine scenarios where ownership and maintenance might be different work groups, and so forth. So I actually think, also taking into account approvals, consultation, and other things, we might want to consider either an additional extension or an extension that does everything we want. We just need to work it out. And finally, I am really in favor of a registry of these artifacts, which captures a lot more detail, like who's using it for what, who wants to be informed, and what the impacts of change, or would be impacted if there was a change. I think a registry like that would be a really helpful thing to have to make all of this work together. So happy to take any questions on any of that if there are any.
All right, not hearing anything, then let's move to
Okay, wow,
Richard.
that was quick.
Oh, sorry, Danielle, you didn't respond quick enough. Okay,
I
over to
know.
you.
Here's a couple of seconds. I think these are so I guess looking at the time, and I think the work that's happening in the terminology work group will be so foundational to all the other work groups that obviously I don't think we're going to get through everything today. I have some really detailed things that I would like to work through around like Ballot and all sorts of other things that Ruben has raised. So I would like us to continue the conversation, if you will.
Yeah. Yep.
But so yeah, let's keep scheduling having these conversations to work through.
Yeah. Yep. Happy to do that. And I think I had avoided talking about Ballot a little bit. It's a very attractive proposition, but I think there's a lot to be worked through about how if we're talking about different ballot cycles, then I think that's a much more complicated discussion that needs to be had with TSC and lots of other people. So I think that's a down the track thing. I think first we need to work out what the content of the IG looks like, what the processes and structures are that we've got in there, and then I think if we get a clear picture of that, then we could have those just other discussions about Ballot and stuff. But yeah.
Ruben, is your hand still up?
Sorry, no, lowering it.
Okay, Richard, over to you.
Okay, a few things. One thing that occurred to me, but Ruben half answered, was we call this an implementation guide, but it wasn't obvious to me that it was a guide to implementation for anyone. I think the FHIR implementation guide resource is the concept is a really vital thing, but I think we often use them for things that are not actually implementation guides. So this thing's going to talk about patterns and use and guidance and a whole bunch of things around terminology, which I wouldn't normally have thought of as being part of an implementation guide. And I just think as a community, it's probably useful, especially when we're talking to people who aren't actually part of building these things, that an implementation guide isn't just a guide to implementation, that they can do different work and they can do a lot more work. But then one of Ruben's comments about terminology servers, well, maybe this is a guide to implementation for a terminology server. So I'm not quite sure where that lands, but just one of the thoughts that we happily call them implementation guides, but often they do a lot more than guide implementation. And that's something that I think we should think about when we're talking about them to people outside the construction of them and when we're writing our introductory narrative to them. So that's not a particular, that's just an observation. There's no response to that needed. The other thought that I had was a thing that's probably going to be worked out is if a terminology artifact has an owner, one of the things that may well happen going forward is that the owner becomes defunct in some sense, or unable to do what's anticipated of an owner. So that stuff needs to be thought through. But I think your thing here about who owns it, who approves it, who must be consulted, there's another thing as well. Who does the work? And that's an issue that will come up, but we don't need to answer now.
Yeah, and I think, look, my thinking on that last question is the default position is that we're putting up our hands to do the work for updating these things. What we don't want to do is take over or take away responsibility for approving that work. So I think if content's moving into this implementation guide, then the terminology work group is putting it up its hand to say, yes, we will do the work of making these updates, but subject to approval from all the people who need to be approved, approvers or consulted or informed.
Yeah, I mean, one possibility is you get some bits of terminology which need to be maintained going forward. There's a steady path of new information. I mean, classic ones are the medicines terminology and things like this, where there's a steady line of new stuff that goes in. Now, not leaving that particular one aside, one thing that this could offer is we can, you could the owners of the IG could offer to do that continuing maintenance, that monitoring and stuff. Now that might not be a task they want to take on board, but it's a service they could propose to offer.
All right, Richard, thank you. I'm mindful about time, so we'll go to Ruben for his final comment, and then we'll wrap up this one. And if there are further questions, we always can come back to this group when we host further conference calls.
Thanks, Stephen. I was actually just going to respond to both of Richard's points there. Firstly, on the reference to this as an implementation guide, this was not arbitrarily decided. When putting together the project proposal, we actually had discussions on what exactly this is. Admittedly, it's not a typical implementation guide. However, it is definitely a protocol specification under the AU GOM, and it will definitely be balloted. And if we look at what the typical characteristics of a FHIR implementation guide are, specifically that there is conformance language and that it is built on FHIR as the primary standard, this definitely ticks the boxes for an implementation guide, and thus we have decided to name it as such. Obviously, it's not one that you would implement in isolation necessarily, but it's definitely an implementation guide. On the second point on who does the work, so that's really, as Jim mentioned, the terminology work group is more than happy to do the actual editorial work and keeping things well looked after and so forth. But it's only in situations where work group explicitly ask us to be the maintainers or approval to hold the decision-making power for approval that we would do that. We are not trying to move anything in here and then take ownership of it. That's definitely not the intent. We'll do that if asked by a work group.
All right, okay. We are 6
Thanks.
minutes past the hour. Any other comments before we move on to the next one? I'm mindful about time. We're actually sort of like cutting close to the time allocation. All right, if not, then Brett, you have the next item, which is the Ballot 101. I'm not sharing a screen in anticipation that you might have something that you want to share.
I am not in a position to share anything. So the Ballot 101. So I don't know, Danielle, can you help out?
I can pull up the AU course slides and talk to how they're different to base, which is not actually very much, of course. But yeah, I can grab those, although I've just been asked to sign in again thanks to, 2FA. So we'll just make sure that I can do that. And then yeah, I'm absolutely happy to show that and do a little walkthrough of it.
Yeah,
So we have about around 20 minutes for the two items, Danielle. So these are the Ballot 101 and your Jira ticket. So over to you to balance the time.
Yeah, so we'll do ballot 101 first. The other item can in and of itself be voted on and become a ballot reconciliation item. I think that we need to do that, like we need to resolve that particular item in AU Base R7, so what we're working on now, but it doesn't have to be in this meeting.
Okay.
We can move it to the other one. So I'm just opening the PowerPoint now. I will share my screen, and yes, apologies everyone. This will be sparked branded slides, but it's sort of same. Alrighty, so okay. So let's talk ballot. Just a reminder for everyone, there are so balloting is important, and it's the formal process from HL7 Australia on whether undertaking the standards development and publication activity that allows us to form what we call a consensus body. So at this point, these are the HL7 AU members, whether you're organisational or individual, that form a consensus body who will make a determination on a particular standard. That is put forward from a work group and from a specific project, proposing that this is actually a standard and it will be at different levels, maybe a standard for working use or normative, and asks the consensus body to vote on that. And there are a whole number of documents that govern this. I've only listed a few. I think, Brett, you're doing the minutes for today, so can you make sure you link all of these?
For sure.
Cool. So we now have a HL7 Australia Governance and Operations Manual, which covers off the governance rules around the different levels of ballot. We have a really detailed operational kind of balloting set of content. We have our decision-making practices, and it's the same ones we use every meeting. And we will continue to use those as part of a work group as we go through this. And there are bylaws, and that is covering things around like membership and how does all of that work. I think there's probably other documents, but those are the ones that stand out to me. Since I've got board members on the line, Ruben, is there another document that is also important to list out, or are they the main ones?
Perhaps not as strong or as prescriptive, but the HL7 Australia Constitution and the Code of Conduct. But
That's a good point. Yes, the Code of
yeah,
Conduct obviously covers everything. The Constitution, how does that relate in specific to balloting?
it may have some rules regarding membership and that sort of thing, which obviously is a prerequisite for participating in balloting.
Okay, thank you, Ruben. So the idea is the work group has done a piece of work. We're at a stage where we are proposing that we have got something that we think is a standard, and in this case, we think it is sufficient to be a standard that can be used as a working standard, which translates into international to standard for trial use. And so we're asking the consensus body that is formed to make a determination on whether or not they're happy for that to be published and to provide any feedback, which will either be affirmative or negative, for things that they would like us to consider prior to that publication. And in certain circumstances, if they're negative, they're actually indicating that there's an issue of significance that, in their mind, I think would be sufficient to block publication if it wasn't appropriately addressed. And so working standard is the step before normative, where this is the kind of thing that may end up in and of itself be mandated in legislation. It is ready to be implemented. It is a proposal that we think that we have something that is actually functional that could be put into systems, but we are working through it before we move into a normative state. I'm not going to go into too much more detail about that. I also don't have the right slide for base. Apologies. We might have to flick to the base slide to talk about the actual scope. shortly, but I'm just going to do process. So we're going to get two kinds of votes. We're going to get overall votes. Everyone starts with a no vote assigned to them. If for whatever reason they are unable to vote, that stays with a no vote. People may vote abstain, people may vote affirmative, people may vote negative. If someone votes negative, they must have a piece of individual feedback saying what they are actually saying is the significant item that has to be considered by the work group to be addressed before that they would be satisfied that the standard could be published. People can also vote affirmative on individual JIRAs. I do that all the time, and what that is asking for those items to be considered, but that they aren't of a sufficient nature to block publication of the entire thing, is how I think about it. Yeah, I'll move on from that. So, there is a pass fail. Okay. I'm going to reach to you, Ruben, because I haven't updated this against the new HL7AU GOM. I'm assuming we've done the same as international still. So we're like 60% for trial use.
It's been a while now, but I'll look while you're talking.
Okay. So assuming, and Ruben will check it for us, where we've adopted what we've done in the past and is the same as the HL7 International GOM, it's a 60% pass fail. Now that pass fail is against the people who are voting affirmative or negative. So no votes don't count, abstain doesn't count. But we will need a 60% approval rate to give us the remit to say that, yes, the consensus body has considered that this is suitable to be published as a working standard. Now, that does not mean that we do not work through every piece of feedback, and we do. So, every change request that is voted on will be worked through this work group. We might defer some. We'll, go through them and determine what, if any, changes we're going to make. We might, end up rejecting them, but we will work through every piece of feedback, whether it's voted affirmative or negative. There are items that are technical corrections. So if you're a voter, you don't have to vote on technical corrections. And my advice is don't. I mean, you can, but you really don't have to. Technical corrections are where someone is raising what is a defect, and those are always actioned as priority, regardless of whether there is a ballot open or not. I will advise if you are not a ballot voter, review and raise, if you find defects, raise technical corrections, raise change requests. Balloters aren't limited to voting on the feedback they raise. Balloters can vote on anything that's open. So, ideally, any of your feedback is already incorporated, but take the opportunity to have a look at the content that we are adding and raise any items of feedback if you actually think that we need to be considering them, whether they're on the backlog or not. From there, co-chairs will do the administrative stuff, which is doing initial triage, and that's going to include especially things around scope, things around tooling, things around ensuring that work is being done in order to present to this work group in our committee meetings, that we have an initial set of dispositions for consideration amongst the work group. So there's a bunch of admin that the co-chairs will have to go through fairly quickly. And then the work group members, that's us. We're going to vote on every item that gets voted on, affirmative or negative. And ideally, the people who are raising the feedback will be involved in that discussion. The part after that, once all of that's happened, which the target for us is to finish by the end of October, is that HL7 Australia will say, okay, after as a work group, we've worked through it all. One of the co-chairs will email HL7 Australia and go, great, we're done. HL7 Australia will then send out an email to ask people to withdraw their votes in JIRA. This is that closing the loop. So especially for any negative voters, this is the opportunity for people to indicate that they are actually satisfied with the resolution. That's what withdrawal of voting means. And if you haven't withdrawn your vote, then on a negative one, then, well, you're indicating that you aren't satisfied with the resolution. So it's a good opportunity, I think, for us to actually have that captured. And then we confirm if we pass, can we publish, and publication happens. So I'm probably going to leave that there, except with one note to say scope, even things that are raised in AU Base may be out of scope. They may be on terminology that is actually managed by HL7 International. Maybe it's managed by Loinc or STOMED. Maybe it's about the extensions pack. Maybe it's about the FHIR ecosystem. And so part of what is going to happen in terms of triage is trying to understand the root cause of that item. And there may be things that have been asked for in Ballot that can't actually be addressed by this work group because we don't have the remit to vote on it. And things might also be kicked to us. So anything around core, e-requesting, patient summary might come to base because the source of the issue is actually in base. So I think that's probably all I wanted to talk about. I think when we actually get to our first ballot reconciliation meeting, we'll run through more of the details. But overall, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. Questions?
All right, thank you, Danielle, for the comprehensive walkthrough. Questions from the audience?
I did put in the chat, Danielle, that it is 60% and provided the reference in the GOM as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Ruben.
I was
All
just
right.
going to add as well the ballot pages on Confluence, the process pages. They've had an update recently, so including the AUTSC and other parts of the process. So that's been revamped. So hopefully that is reflecting current practice.
Okay, all good. Thank you. We are coming up to 10 minutes to the half hour. So, Daniel, do you still want to pursue the geo ticket, or you think that we don't need to discuss this?
I very suspect this will take longer, because everything does.
Yep.
But let's socialize it. Do you want to go to the Jira ticket?
All right. Let
And I'll at
me.
least raise it so the next time we vote, we can, or at least the next time it comes up, which will be our next FHIR Work Group call, then
Okay.
we've got a background for that.
All right. I'm sharing my screen. So here is the Jira ticket.
Okay. So the context for this is there's an observation profile in AU Base that is called Assertion of Absence, or Assertion of No Relevant Finding, actually, um, which is about, I guess, no known X, no history of X, or as Michael Lawley would prefer it to be known no X, I believe, as in we're asserting that a patient is known not to be currently taking any medications. Um, we have no known history of procedure. So it is a positive assertion based on typically something that a clinician is actually asking a patient or a patient actively filling out a form. So it's not like an emptiness. There is an assertion aspect here. So we have a observation profile in AU Base that modeled that quite early on. And in particular, we created, and by we, I'll put my agency hat back on briefly, although I don't work there anymore, that when we were really looking at doing this many years ago, we were looking at how to represent when a patient says, I am not currently taking any medication. And that is where that concept that is shown in the JIRA of no known current meds happened. Now, through the work that has happened through patient summary, we have since shifted that with agreement with IPS. We've had a joint meeting with AU Base and AU Core. We've got guidance now that says that the concept to use is different to that one. So the proposal is that instead of having a concept we have now taken out of any of our guidance to use, that we should be replacing that concept with the one that we actually want people to use, which is the 787481004 no known medications. And that is now the agreed in the Australian realm and the international realm on the concept to use when you're saying a patient is not taking any medications and you asserting that positively. So that's what needs to be in the value set for this observation. Are people following me so far?
Yes.
Awesome. So we've got a couple of choices. Um, my preference is that we just do a straight replace. We take out the no known current medicines and we put in no known medications. Now, this is an NCTS set, so that would also mean that we uprev, because that's how SNOMED NCTS value sets work, is it'll go to like a -2. So that assertion of absence value set would be uprev to a -2. And instead of having no known current medications, it would have the no known medications. Now, actually, can you just go to the profile? So I think if you click on that, yeah, AU assertion of no relevant finding one.
Yep.
All right, and we just have a look at the code and the binding strength. Just want to confirm that.
So where do you
Probably
want me
diff
to go?
table is easier at this point.
And this the
Yeah,
what
yeah. Click on the differential table. Sorry,
differential? Yep.
differential.
Okay.
Yeah, scroll that. Here we go. Code. So it's extensible. Um, so this is, I think, it's sort of arguable that this is a breaking
Mm.
change because of the nature of extensibility. But regardless, I do think that our position is that you should be using the code that we have just agreed in AU Base to use and agreed in AU Core. So that needs to be reflected in this observation profile, and the value set governing that is that assertion of absence value set. Go, Richard.
So the code that we want to use is, in SNOMED terms, a hierarchical parent of the code that we want to stop using. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah. So in that sense, yes, it's a different code. Anything with the old code would, in a sense, be um, oh, something with the old code. Would it actually be invalid because we say you need to use the new code, not it or a child?
So theoretically, if we swapped out from this value set that AU specific code and put in the international one, yes, that's what it would mean, because extensible would say if you could possibly represent it using the codes in this value set, since it's a child, like, yeah, I think it would. We could keep both, I guess, but we actually don't want people to use the Australian code anymore. So I don't think we actually want it in the value set.
Yeah, yeah. And look, any old records that use the old one are not going, we don't want things that pass the old ones to come up clean against the new value set anyway. So yeah, it sounds like a break and change to me too.
All right. Brett.
I was just going to agree. So yeah, it's definitely breaking, but I think it's definitely the right answer. So I think yeah, I'm for this. It's good.
But yeah, so the proposal is we do a swap out. So we swap out, or we take out the Australian concept, which I think is actually Michael Osborne. Did we deprecate that now in the SNOMED AU extension? I mean, it was an argument about whether or not we would. I don't remember what the answer was.
So Michael Osborne is not here. So is
Oh,
that a question that you address to him?
oh, I feel like he was. He is here.
Is
He
he
is
here?
here. Yeah, he's
Oh,
here.
I might have
Michael, we
missed him.
can't hear
Okay,
you.
sorry,
My
Michael.
microphone wasn't working. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, I just got distracted. I missed the concept that you're asking about, Danielle.
Oh, I think maybe Jim might have answered it. It's the no known current meds, the one that we have made a child. So I suspect because we made it a child in SNOMED of the international concept, So it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 9, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, etc. No known current meds, which I believe got modeled now as a child of the
Yeah, that's
concept we
correct.
want people to use. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's still active, and I just wanted to double check that, but it is a child of no known medications. So I think my proposal is that we um publish a version 2 of this value set that replaces the no known current medicines with the known medications concept.
So I have a question. So
Mm.
the no known medication is actually a broader concept than no known current medication. So I stating that I would like people to use no known medication, given that it covers no known current and no known past. Is that the
Yes.
intention? All right.
Yep, that's 100% the intention. We've done a lot of that guidance already, and in fact, published a value set already that is bound to like AU Base medication statement that does all of that. So that was the work that we did, and we forgot to include this change as part of that whole process. So this is more of a cleanup JIRA than anything else.
Okay, so then for older data that uses the no known current medication code, so they can then be rolled up to the no known medications when you read them. Is that correct? Or you still, because the child is still there, then you can still look into STOMAC CD, the value set that has the child in there for the explicit semantic.
Well, and we're at time, so I guess I've socialized it. We can maybe we'll
Sure.
vote on it next meeting because I
Yep.
think we've run out.
Okay. Sounds good. Look, yeah, we are at time, so yeah, I just curious about sort of how to deal with the historic data. That's all. All right, we can pick it up some other time.
But before we do, there's one important thingy to discuss that's on the agenda. Our next FHIR Work Group meeting clashes with Connectathon, so we have to decide what to do with it before we like end this call.
Okay. Yep.
I propose we cancel it.
Yeah. So that's a
Sure.
proposal to cancel it. All right. And then we will reconvene sort of after the connectathon.
Now, is that a motion, Brett?
Yes. I make a motion that we cancel the next call since it clashes with the connectathon.
And do we have what will be the next date of call, Brett?
Good question. 2 weeks after that.
Okay. So the motion is we cancel the 26th of August call, and then the next call will be 2 weeks after the 26th of August, which would
Yeah.
take
Which
us
would
to
be the 9th of September.
yep, which take us to early September. All right. So we have a motion on the table. Anyone who wants to second that?
I'll second that, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. I don't think that we need to go into an electronic poll. Let's sort of do it a verbal call for the questions. Anyone who oppose? Anyone who abstains? All right, uniformly approved. So the motion is carried. All right, we are 1 minute past time. So if there is no other business, then we can consider meeting adjourned. All right, thank you, everyone.
Stephen.
Hopefully we'll see many of you coming back for the next Tuesday's AU PD introductory call, project call, and then the AU FHIR Group call subsequently. Thank you for your time.
Well done,
Thank
Steve.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.